Every World Cup has that team that shows up to the group stage, and everyone's already thinking, okay, 3 points, sorted. But sometimes it's not a small nation with no real chance. Sometimes it's a country with real football culture, players good enough to do better. And once, I'm not joking, it was the actual host nation. 8 World Cups. I guarantee at least 2 of these catch you off guard. And if you're already into this, subscribe, leave a like. You know the drill. 1994. Greece at USA 94 was their first ever World Cup. First ever. And look, you'd forgive a bit of naivety. First tournament, nerves, tough group. Fine, but you'd at least expect them to score a goal. Just one. One single goal in 3 World Cup games. They didn't score one. They scored 0. 3 games, 0 goals, 10 conceded. They lost 2-0 to Nigeria. Not ideal, but okay. Then came 4-0 against Argentina. Maradona's last World Cup. Argentina were flying. Fine. But then, and this is the one, 4-0 to Bulgaria. Bulgaria. The same Bulgaria that, yes, went on to reach the semi-finals. But still, Greece had the same amount of time to prepare. They were just worse. Bottom of Group D, and completely invisible in a tournament they'd waited decades to reach. What makes it stranger is what came next. 10 years later, these same Greeks, the same footballing culture, the same country, went to Portugal, beat France, beat the Czech Republic, and won Euro 2004. One of the greatest upsets in the history of the sport. 1998. Okay, I have to talk about this one carefully, because it's personal. I'm American. I grew up watching this team, and the 1998 World Cup squad was not bad. Kassie Keller in goal. Claudio Reyna pulling strings in midfield. They'd finished 3rd at the Copa America 3 years earlier, against actual South American nations. There were legitimate reasons to believe. They lost all 3 games. 2-0 to Germany. Fine, Germany were Germany. 1-0 to Yugoslavia. Annoying, but whatever. And then 2-1 to Iran. Iran. I need you to understand what that result meant beyond football. The United States and Iran had not had diplomatic relations since 1980. This was one of the most politically charged international fixtures in modern history. The whole world was watching, and the US lost. I remember watching this at home in California. I was a kid. My mom's side of the family, they're Brazilian. They called the house after the Iran game just to check I was okay. As a joke, obviously. But still, they went home bottom of Group F, without a point, without a performance, without an explanation. The squad had no excuse. They had the players. And somehow, in the biggest game of their tournament, they lost to Iran. That result still gets brought up every single time someone questions whether the US belongs in serious football conversations. And honestly, after 1998, you can see why. 2002. Saudi Arabia, right. So, Germany versus Saudi Arabia. 2002 World Cup. Group stage. Saudi Arabia concede 8 goals. 8 in one game? Just think about that for a second. You're a professional footballer. You've qualified for the World Cup. You've traveled to Japan. You've trained. You're ready. And then Germany put 8 past you before you've even had a chance to figure out what's going on. Miroslav Klose scored a hat-trick. It was relentless. Saudi Arabia then lost 3-0 to Cameroon and 1-0 to Ireland. 3 games. 0 goals scored. 12 conceded. The federation sacked the coaching staff mid-tournament, which, what exactly were they expecting to fix at that point? The campaign was already over. The 8-0 loss to Germany is one of the heaviest defeats in World Cup history, and it defined how the world saw Saudi football for 2 full decades. Then Qatar 2022 happened, and Saudi Arabia beat Argentina 2-1, and suddenly everyone wanted to move on. I was actually in the stadium that day in Lusail. I understand the euphoria. Genuinely, that was one of the most electric atmospheres I've ever sat in. But here we don't forget the 8-0. 2006 to Serbia and Montenegro. This one has context that goes way beyond football. And honestly, it's exactly the kind of story that made me fall in love with this sport in the first place. Serbia and Montenegro voted to split into two separate nations during the 2006 tournament. While they were playing, the country was literally dissolving in real time as their players were on the pitch in Germany. Think about that for a second. You're representing a nation that technically stopped existing before your last game was even finished. There is no parallel for that in World Cup history. None. And the football was just as chaotic. Argentina beat them 6-0. In that game, and if you haven't seen this, go and find it right now, Cambiasso scored a goal that involved every single outfield player in a passing move of about 24 touches. In a World Cup group game, against a team that was already falling apart. They also lost 1-0 to the Netherlands and 3-2 to Ivory Coast. 10 goals conceded, no wins. When the context around a team is broken enough, politically, institutionally, it doesn't matter who you've got on the pitch. The whole thing collapses anyway. 2010, North Korea. North Korea hadn't been at a World Cup since 1966. Since 1966, that's 44 years. And in 1966, they'd shocked Italy and reached the quarterfinals. So when they qualified for South Africa, there was genuine curiosity. What does this team actually look like? What's going on in there? Their first game was against Brazil. And honestly, they were decent. They lost 2-1, but they competed. They pushed. It felt like something was building. The story was writing itself. And they played Portugal. Portugal scored 7. North Korea scored 0. 7-0. It remains one of the heaviest defeats in World Cup history, and completely erased whatever credibility the Brazil performance had built. They also lost 3-0 to Ivory Coast, minus 11 goal difference across the group. But here's what I keep coming back to with this one. I studied journalism, and one of the first things you learn is that the absence of information is also a story. With North Korea in 2010, the silence is the whole story. These players went home to a country where failure, especially public, internationally broadcast failure, carries consequences that have nothing to do with football. We got almost no information from inside the camp. We don't really know what happened between the Brazil game and the Portugal game. We know the scoreline. We don't know anything else. And honestly, that's the most disturbing part of this entire list. 2014 to Cameroon. This one hits differently for me. The 2014 World Cup was in Brazil. My family is Brazilian. I have uncles, cousins, people in Curitiba who lived that tournament in a way I'll never fully replicate from here in London. Before the group stage even started, reports came out of serious disputes over bonus payments between the players and the federation. Arguments, a divided dressing room, players allegedly refusing to train properly. The whole thing was fractured before a ball was kicked. Samuel Eto'o was in that squad. End of his career, yes, but still Eto'o. Still one of the greatest African players in history. It didn't matter. They lost 1-0 to Mexico, 4-0 to Croatia, and 4-1 to Brazil. 9 goals conceded. 1 scored, in a game they were already losing heavily. Eto'o deserved a better final World Cup than that. Every fan of African football deserved better than that. To the 18, Panama's story is different from everyone else on this list. Different in the best possible way, actually. They were at their first ever World Cup. First time in history. And they got there, partly, because the United States, my country, failed to qualify for Russia 2018. They lost to Trinidad and Tobago in the final round of qualifying. Trinidad and Tobago, who were already eliminated. What I will say is that Panama took the spot and showed up. They were drawn against England, Belgium, and Tunisia. Brutal group. They lost 3-0 to Belgium, 6-1 to England, 2-1 to Tunisia. 11 goals conceded in total. Statistically, one of the worst campaigns on this list. But when Philippe Baloy scored against England to make it 6-1, watch the Panama bench. Pure, unfiltered joy. Players sprinting onto the pitch. Staff losing their minds. A country scoring at a World Cup for the very first time in their first ever tournament appearance. It didn't matter that they were losing 6-1. That goal meant everything. The numbers were awful. The experience was clearly extraordinary. And honestly, good for them. 2022, Qatar. And then there's Qatar. I want to be precise about something here. Qatar didn't qualify for the 2022 World Cup. They were the host nation, which means automatic entry. That's standard practice. It's been the rule forever. I'm not criticizing that. But Qatar had never come close to qualifying on merit. Never. What they had done was spend over a decade and billions of dollars preparing for this specific moment. New stadiums, new infrastructure, a naturalization program to bring in players with Qatari eligibility, an entire national football identity constructed, essentially, from scratch, for this tournament. And then the tournament started, in their own country, in front of their own fans. And they lost 2-0 to Ecuador in the opening game of the whole competition. Then 3-1 to Senegal. Then 1-0 to the Netherlands. No wins. 1 goal scored. 7 conceded. The gap between everything that was invested and what actually happened on the pitch was staggering. And look, I live in London. I work in football every single day. I've watched what money does to this sport up close for years now. I know this conversation is more complicated than it seems. But Calber 2022 was the most expensive and most public test of that theory. And football won the argument. Like it almost always does. You can build the stadiums. You can bring in the players. You can engineer every external condition imaginable. But you cannot buy the decades it takes to build a real footballing culture. You just can't. And if you're into this kind of thing, there's another video on the channel you'll want to watch next.